Hey folks, Phil Gallagher back for another dose of Daily Death and Taxes. Let's go ahead and jump right into it with this blue-white D&T deck. And oh, what's that? What's that? Oh, that was the drop button. That wasn't the join match button. All right, I'm gonna do something a little different for today's daily D&T since we have 0-4'd this league thus far with this deck. And I want to do an extended deck tech / deck debrief on this deck and why I think this deck has serious problems with it. So let's do a deep dive analysis for today's daily D&T. I think this will be worth your time just in terms of conceptual deck building, but there's not going to be an actual match today. So let's look at conceptually what was this deck list trying to do? What was this deck list trying to win against? Specifically, this deck list is tailored to beat combo. So you have Thalia's, Meddling Mages, Spell Quellers, Force of Wills, and we can also kind of count Venser as an honorary counterspell, and Vendilion Click as something else that is disruptive to combo. So relative to a normal D&T deck list, this deck is pretty darn good at combo. It also has 2 more pieces that go and disrupt your few elements that a combo deck might have to bounce or otherwise get your things out of play. So in the sideboard, similarly, we have 5 more cards that are also good against combo. So what did we not play against this week, though? Combo. Combo is the answer. All week we played against mid-range decks. And I did not have what I needed to beat those decks. So let's talk about why. Number 1, many of the cards in this deck have situational timing. So what I mean by that is, in order for Force of Will to be good, your opponent has to cast a spell, and you have to have a blue card that you're willing to pitch to it. Force of Will does nothing against something that's already on board. Similarly, this Mariner does nothing if you don't already have another creature on board. It's just a really bad 2/2. Similarly, Meddling Mage as a turn 2 play is a little weak if you can't tell what your opponent is on due to just sort of an ambiguous opener. You know, if they just go blue fetch land go and you're on the play and Meddling Mage is your turn 2 play, you know, you might not even play that card, or you just have to like play it and name something like Brainstorm. And we also had trouble closing out games. So normally, any creature in D&T can become a threat due to the equipment package. With 4 copies of Stoneforge and 3 copies of equipment, you will find a piece of equipment in most games that go long. We didn't have that option. So there were times when we would be staring down like a Bob, some Mentor tokens, a Meddling Mage, or something, not a Meddling Mage, any stupid creature with at least 2 power. And I couldn't attack with a bunch of my bodies into it. So I often found myself brick walling and just getting stuck where I couldn't force damage through. I just kind of had to sit there. I had to continue to extend into sweepers like Terminus, Supreme Verdict, Dead of Winter in the Bug Snow matchup that I saw. And that wasn't great. Like, even though I can grind value with Recruiter, we realized that this deck actually doesn't have a very good Recruiter package. There are a lot of things to get, but not a lot of variety to get. So some things aren't fetchable by that to start with. So like we're not going to be able to fetch our Quellers to start with, since Recruiter is looking at toughness. So like we can't get these. That would be a little crazy if that were the case. So a lot of times when you're in these Recruiter stalls, you want to be getting something that's just hard to kill that can attack through. But that's further playing into things like Supreme Verdict, Dead of Winter, Terminus, and stuff of that nature, which we were seeing. Toxic Deluge being another one that we didn't see, but very reasonably could have been in a bug mid-range deck. So without the ability to get something that actually removes a creature with Recruiter, I don't really think this is a playable shell. So like we don't have the option to Recruiter for Palace Jailer. We don't have the option to Recruiter for Flicker Wisp. We can technically recruit her for a Venser to bounce something, but that costs us our Ether Vial. And when we're in these Soul Herder value chains, I don't know that that's something that's really acceptable. So let's resort this by converted mana cost. So another issue that I kept running into was that like every non-creature spell that you play in a Vial deck just makes yourself worse and worse against the decks where you have to pressure your opponent. So while in theory, when you're playing against a combo deck, you can drop like 2 hate bears and then hold up the Force of Will to protect against the thing that is going to get you out of that lock. That's cool and all, but you know what happens when you've played 2 creatures to board, your opponent has the bigger creature, and then you draw this Force of Will. It's no good, right? So overall, there was just this awkwardness and tension in my deck, where when I drew the counter spells after my opponent already had the big threat in play, because these weren't things that helped play to the board, I couldn't catch up, and that was problematic. We didn't run into it necessarily this league. Well, I guess we kind of did with the Snapcaster Mages, but I Spellquellered Snapcaster Mages a couple of times, and then a few turns later, my opponent would answer the Queller, get the Snapcaster back, and that's fine. That's gonna happen. But I just don't feel safe playing this list. Like I know, like we have the Moms and Mariners to protect against a lot of these things, but if I'm going to be playing around sweepers by trimming some of these things that are going to sit there and not do something that strongly impacts the game, I also don't play towards protecting these, which is another problem in and of itself. And because I'm not protecting them well enough, I run into problems where, like, I've Meddling Maged a key card for my opponent, they find a new named removal spell, they get rid of this, they get rid of the next creature, and the game kind of cascades out of control. So I think that this deck has many of the same complaints that I have with the like Esper Vial deck, where I just don't feel like the mana base is solid enough, and I don't feel like the Force of Will is particularly good in the Vial deck. I don't feel like I had enough mana sources. The mana sources that I did have were often inconsistent. We mulliganed a whole bunch this league. Looking at the sideboard, similarly, like it's trying out some of the tech from the Esper Vial deck, such as Peacekeeper. So Peacekeeper is another one of these things that is going to be potentially good against an aggro deck. Maybe. So I think I brought this in versus Blue-Black Shadow. And there were some situations where I had like an empty board, and a Recruiter of the Guard for a Peacekeeper could have potentially bought me some time. But aren't I dead as soon as this leaves the battlefield? And again, if my opponent is doing things like Plague Engineer that are going to take care of the Mother of Runes, or even just the Peacekeeper itself, is this actually giving me enough outs? Like, is this going to be worth the slot and worth the, not cumulative upkeep, but the consistent cost of 2 of my lands? Maybe. Maybe. And note that this is symmetrical, so it's also creatures I control can't attack. So as a whole, I don't really think that this strategy is viable as a whole. It's definitely interesting, and if you're just straight up playing against combo, maybe this is in fact good. But I don't feel like this deck has legs against the field. Or if it does, like, you should definitely try to reevaluate some of the strengths and weaknesses of this deck and see what you can do to shift things a little bit more back to the center. You know, you're giving up a lot against Delver, I think, by playing some of the things that we're seeing here. Like, you're down a Swords, you're down 4 tutors for your life gain, you're down a piece of life gain, you're down against the thing that lets you push through Pyromancer tokens, Dreadhorde Arcanist, basically the entire blue-red Delver deck. And I don't know that this engine is going to be worth it. I also very, 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 very much miss Flicker Wisp in this deck list. So that's a decent amount to say about this deck list, and more of a debrief than I usually do. So, in thinking about a metagame, sometimes you have, an idea where you go and you try out something new, and that does attack the metagame. But remember, there is a super wide range of decks that are legacy viable that people are going to be playing. So if you skew your deck towards beating, the tier 1 stuff too much, you definitely expose yourself to other weaknesses. All right, I hope that was still something that was useful for today. But I don't think I had the oomph in me to do another one of these matches with blue-white. That was rough. Now I'm going to say I definitely did not play this list optimally. I made a couple of boneheaded mistakes that were just due to me being a little bit tired and being on like recording number 8 of the day, and that is what it is. So, for example, I threw one game versus Miracles where I needed to double protect that creature to attack in with lethal with Force of Will backup, when I could have just ported instead, and I just clicked my colors in the wrong order. That is what it is. That was an error on my end. And there were some other little things that I did that were a little bit questionable because I was tired. So, like, keep in mind that I'm owning up to the mistakes that I made while playing this deck, but I also think that a normal D&T deck with a more optimized sideboard is probably going to be a much safer pick in going into any event that matters than something like this. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be back next week, probably with a regular D&T list after this week. This was pretty brutal.